This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories.
Hey friends, episode 719 on deck here. We're going to be hearing how to live the American dream and how much work actually goes into it. And by way of example, I'll be talking to RT Custer. He founded the Vortic Watch Company. Very interesting topic to me. How do you market watches? How do you build that community? How do you even get people to pay attention to you? And do people still wear watches? I think so. I mean, I'm wearing a watch right now. So very excited to find out the story behind the company, how they grew it, and what we can all learn from it. So welcome to the show, RT. Ooh, wrong button. Hold on. Too many buttons to push.
Thanks for having me, Christoph.
Nice to see you. We're just going to go with the punches here. What do you do? Live TV. So tell me about the company. What prompted you to start it, and how did you grow it over time?
Yeah, so Vortic Watch Company is like Vortex and TikTok, a beautiful clash of old and new. And what we do is we actually take antique American pocket watches that were made 100 years ago, and we turn them into one-of-a-kind wristwatches. So everything inside the watch is, roughly 100 years old, an original American antique made by one of the great American watch companies like Hamilton, Elgin, Waltham, or Illinois, originally as a pocket watch. Fast forward to today, most pocket watches are scrapped for the gold and silver of their original case, leaving the inside as trash. And we upcycle those, professionally restore them, meticulously rework those movements, is what they're called, inside the pocket watch. And then we have a manufacturing business here where we're making all the outside of the wristwatch, the case, the crown, the hardware, the leather, to turn that old pocket watch into a wristwatch. And it's one of the only truly American-made wristwatches. It's 100% made in USA, built right here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And it's a piece of American history on the wrist. So that's why I like to talk about the American dream, because, I get to live the dream running a manufacturing company, making American jobs and making stuff here. But really that's what we do, is we tell stories of history in these pocket watches turned into wristwatches.
So interesting, and kudos to you to creating American jobs in America. So a pocket watch, that's like they would have it in their pocket and just kind of pull it out, right? That's like how I picture that. Don't see that too often.
Always have one on my table. That's my my Ford pocket watch. It goes with my old Ford truck.
How do you even find these old pocket watches? I mean, it's like that could be a story in itself right there.
Yeah. So if you've ever seen like American Pickers on the History Channel, it's kind of like that. There's every day somewhere in the US, a pawn shop, a jewelry store, or a watchmaker goes out of business, or somebody passes away and they don't know what to do with all of the watches and diamonds and jewelry and all the things from that store. And estate buyers come in and they buy the entire estate, or, they buy out the whole business, and the diamonds go somewhere, the gold goes somewhere, all the jewelry and rings go somewhere else. The watches, can get sold. There's a huge market for vintage watches, especially Rolex and Omega and all those things, but there's almost no market for an antique American pocket watch. Over 150 million pocket watches were made in USA between about 1850 and 1950. So there's a lot of them out there, and most of them are sitting in a drawer in somebody's house. It's grandpa's watch. It's just sitting there and nobody knows what to do with it. Or it's in the bucket in the back of a pawn shop and it's been scrapped for the gold or silver on the outside, and they feel bad throwing it away because they know it's a piece of history. It's a little engine that tells time that was made in Chicago 100 years ago. And so they feel bad throwing it away, but there's really no use for it. And so from those estate buys, those estate buyers go out and they buy and they liquidate all of those stores. They bring all those pocket watches and other things that are left over that people don't really have a use for to estate auctions. And I work with estate auctions to basically buy thousands of pocket watches and try to give them a second shot at life. We cherry pick the best ones that we can. We bring them here to Fort Collins, Colorado, and my team of watchmakers goes through and restores just the best of them, and then we turn them into a Vortic watch.
And how did you come up with this idea to even start this company? Were you just interested in watches, saying the latest Apple Watch is not old enough for me? What's the where you had that?
Yeah, so my original co-founder and business partner, Tyler Wolf, and I were playing golf at Penn State one day after class. We were studying engineering at the time. This was probably 12 years ago at this point. And we had a bunch of ideas regarding watches. We just thought watches were cool. And we started asking the question of like, okay, if we were going to make a watch or we were going to prototype a watch, as engineers dabbling in college of like product development, that'd be kind of fun. If we were going to make a watch, let's try to make it in America. When we started asking the question, why are all watches made in Switzerland or China? Like, what's going on here? And we stumbled on the history of the old watch companies that made pocket watches 100 years ago. And basically the light bulb went off of, that story I just told. The people are throwing them away. They're getting scrapped. There's millions of them out there. You just kind of have to know where to look. And that's the hard part, the movement, all the gears and springs that tell time. That's the hardest thing to make. And they made it 100 years ago, and it was all made in USA back then. We can make the bigger stuff on the outside. And we basically took that concept and we put it on Kickstarter in 2014. And honestly, Christoph, the rest is history. We've sold every watch we've made since. Sometimes you get lucky and you have a good idea. It's not a huge idea. It's a niche company. We can only make a few hundred watches a year. But it's the American dream, right? It's a small business. We have 12 people that work here now. We have all of our own machines. So we're cutting the metal to make the watches right here. All the watchmakers, sit just really through this wall right next to me. We do as much as we can in-house. And, in order to scale, recently we started another brand. It's called Colorado Watch Company, and those are modern watches made in USA now. But for the last 10 years, it's just been taking old pocket watches, turning them into wristwatches, which was that core concept on the golf course, basically.
Everything from here is history. There's a lot of history involved. Now, my question is, so when I see these watches, are they mostly redone or up, up surface or whatever you call it? Are they mostly for men or women, or is there a mix, or how does that look?
Sure. So I like to say we just make the watches. Anyone can buy them. Anyone can wear them. I would say most of my consumers are men. It is a larger watch. The sizes of our watches are 43 millimeters at the smallest to 49 millimeters at the largest. For reference, your average Rolex or like an Apple Watch is going to be 43 to 45 millimeters. So especially my 47 and my 49 millimeter watches, those are quite large. But even a 43 millimeter watch would be it would be considered a large women's watch. I do have some, female customers that buy them for themselves and love it. And, we just try to take those pieces of history and make them into watches for everyone and anyone who wants to tell the story that's on your wrist.
So, until today, I looked at watches mostly functional, right? I mean, here's what it does, here's blah, blah, blah. But I mean, it's kind of an interesting concept. And I mean, I'm a potential customer, but I didn't even think about this. I didn't even think this was a thing. I've never even heard of it until you and I met. How do you get this in front of people, and who's like the typical buyer? I mean, but how do you even know? How do they even know that they're interested if they don't even know about that this is being done?
Yeah. So zooming out, I run one of the only American-made watch companies, and that was the original concept: was let's make everything in America. And that's why we have two brands now. Vortic Watch Company is pocket watches turned into wristwatches. And now Colorado Watch Company is the most American-made watch today. It's a modern watch, very scalable. I can make tens of thousands of them and compete with the Swiss, and they're at a lower price point. They're in the roughly $1,000 range versus a Vortic watch is in the $3,000 to $10,000 range. But to answer your question, to market all of this, basically I do as many events as I can. I try to get as many watches on as many wrists as I can because our customers like to talk about them. It's a conversation piece. I think you kind of alluded to that of like, it's not just function. It doesn't just tell you the time. It also tells a story. And so if you're going to wear a watch, you might as well wear something that tells a story. And so, my customers, I think, are some of my best marketing. And then for the last few years, I've been teaching myself how to do Facebook ads because I couldn't afford to work with an agency. And sometimes you get lucky. Like I said, we got a watch on John Krasinski in the show Jack Ryan, and that blew up. It was one of our military watches. We make a watch called the Military Edition just once a year on Veterans Day. They're pocket watches that were used in World War II. They were flown on B-17 bombers in the Second World War. It's the coolest watch ever, and we call it the Military Edition. But anyway, John Krasinski has one and wore it on the show Jack Ryan, and people started Googling, like, what watch is he wearing? It's a big watch. It's cool. Like, it's interesting. And so when he sent those watches back, because it was a prop, and so after the show, they sent the watches back, I'm giving them away. So I'm running a sweepstakes to say, enter to win the watch that John Krasinski wore on TV. And I'm putting ad spend behind that. And that works. And really the goal of all my marketing, whether it's the sweepstakes or to go into events or trade shows or, just running ads or making content in general, my goal is to obtain their email address, the potential customer, sign up for my email list, and then I send one weekly email newsletter with all the watches we made this week. They're all one of a kind. And so every week I have new content, new watches literally to share. And I just say, here's another email every Thursday with pictures of watches. Our open rates on those emails are insane, because it's just pictures of watches and people think it's cool. And then that's how we sell is, mostly email marketing.
Very interesting. He sends it back. And then, of course, there's only one copy of that or one version.
That's it. One of one.
People can buy. Yeah, very cool. You mentioned people wear watches with a story. Do you typically know the story behind the watch? And if you do, how do you know?
Yeah. So the story that we know is there's a few different, I guess, revenue streams or different options here. One is those military watches I talked about. So just once a year on Veterans Day, we make the Military Edition. And those are watches that we definitely know the story. It was a pocket watch made by Hamilton Watch Company in Pennsylvania just for World War II. So they were manufactured between 1941 and 1947, I think was the last, batch that they made. And they were used in the bombers. It was used by the navigator on a bomber. Hamilton made 120,000 of them, and they're all uniquely serialized. So there's a serial number on the back of each one, and we can tell you this was most likely used on the bomber. It was made for that purpose back then. And that's why we only make 50 of them a year as a limited edition. So that one, we have a great story. The one-of-a-kind watches that we sell through our Watch of the Day program. So every day, Monday through Friday, we make one new one-of-a-kind watch available on the website. Those we tell a story based on that serial number and how old it is. So today's watch, for instance, is a Rockford watch. It was a pocket watch made in Rockford, Illinois in 1910. And so I use ChatGPT to do all the research and say, what happened in 1910 and why was that interesting? And then I write a description and a story about each one. And so, for instance, the Navy Pier in Chicago started construction in 1910. So the story I wrote about today's watch was, imagine you're a banker in downtown Chicago. You're holding a Rockford watch built just 90 miles away from you, and you're watching the project that you funded get started on construction, and it's the Navy Pier. If you've ever been to Chicago and you've seen the Navy Pier, you'll have goosebumps like I do right now. It's just really cool to think that's 115 years ago, and this pocket watch can now be on your wrist. It's one of a kind. And so that's how we market our one-of-a-kind watches. And then finally, a lot of people ask, like, what if I have one? And so if you have grandpa's pocket watch and it's sitting in a drawer somewhere in the house or it's sitting in a safe deposit box, we run a service called Convert Your Watch. And we're one of the only companies in the world that you send us your pocket watch. We can not only restore it, but most likely, as long as it's an American pocket watch, we can turn it into a wristwatch. And now it has your story. And now it has all the story from your family and your history.
Why were pocket watches even a thing? And why are they not a thing anymore today? Do you know?
Yeah. So back in the day, if you wanted to tell time, and I'm talking back in the day, I'm talking like 1850. One of the best companies, one of the biggest companies that made a ton of pocket watches, specifically 40 million pocket watches, was Waltham Watch Company in Waltham, Massachusetts. They still call it Watch City. The factory still stands. It's a beautiful building, and they made tens of millions of pocket watches there. In the 1850s, there was only two ways to tell time, and it was a clock or a pocket watch. That's it. The wristwatch didn't exist. And obviously clocks, were mostly like grandfather clocks and big clocks on walls places. They were all hand, there's no batteries. I mean, there's no electricity. So you're using weights and levers and gears and things like that to tell time via clocks. And so the pocket watch was created to be a mobile clock. And so back then, they were making millions of them because that was basically the iPhone at the time. It was mobile timekeeping, and you had to wind it every day. There's no battery. So you wound it up. You made sure it was on time and synchronized with your grandfather clock at your house or the big clock at the train station, once a day. And that's how you knew what time it was. And if you needed to know what time it was on the go, that was really the only option. And yeah, fast forward to today. I mean, the wristwatch came about right after World War II. I mean, people had wristwatches before then, like World War I, they had trench watches where somebody like literally strapped a pocket watch to their wrist when they were in the trenches in World War I. But like after World War II is when they started being prolific. And the Swiss ended up being better at making wristwatches than the American watch companies. My theory on this would take a long time to develop and to explain, but long story short, the Swiss were neutral for both the world wars. And so they got 10 years of research and development ahead of us, American watch companies. And the Swiss really took over, and they were, that's why Rolex and Omega and all the big watch companies today are in Switzerland. They really dominated the industry post World War II until today. And obviously there's watches made in all countries today, and there's a global supply chain. But, if you think of watches, typically high-end watches, you traditionally think of Switzerland, and that's why. But yeah, that's the shortest I can make that story.
I mean, very, very interesting to me. Never crossed my mind to even look that up or anything. What of all your pocket watches, are they all American based, or do you have any international ones, or how does that look?
Yeah. So early on in the business, we decided to focus on just American made pocket watches. One, because the original idea was let's try to make a watch that's truly made in USA. And by using American pocket watches, we're achieving that, and we're making 100% of the watch in the US. But then as we did the research, we, being America, really from Boston to Chicago, there was 10 companies that I call the great American watch companies. Those 10 companies made over 150 million pocket watches from 1850 to 1950. And at that time, for those 100 years, we were the Switzerland of the world. We made the best pocket watches in the world, and we made them at scale. I mean, millions and millions of them. Pocket watches made in Switzerland or Germany, or really the European pocket watches made at the same time, traditionally are going to be one of a kind. They were made by one watchmaker, one craftsperson from start to finish. And they weren't made to be, like mass produced. There weren't replaceable parts, for after sales service and to fix them up every 10, 20 years when they need some love, like the American watches were. And so you don't want to turn a Rolex pocket watch made in 1910 into a wristwatch the way that we do. It would be irreplaceable if it broke. There's no spare parts. There's no everything is handmade. And so if for some reason it didn't work anymore, almost no watchmaker in the world would be able to fix it, as compared to the American pocket watches where they made, at least 1,000 or 10,000 of that same model, kind of like a car, where there's spare parts and there's, engineering drawings and there's, resources for watchmakers to be able to fix it sometime in the future. I always want to manufacture something that I can fix, whether it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And so that's, some of the reasons we've decided to just fully focus on only American pocket watches turned into wristwatches.
I mean, it would be almost, they probably would cost way more too, is my guess.
Way more.
If there's just one of a kind, like truly the iPhone of its time, the pocket watch. I mean, this is like to even think about it that way, right? I mean, it could barely do anything except tell the time. But do these watches, like, how do they fit? Do they weigh more? Do they weigh less? Do they weigh the same? I mean, how does it compare to like your typical watch? And I mean, maybe not just the weight, but in general, is there a different feel to it, or what do people say about that?
Yeah. So like, if you go to vorticwatches.com/watches and you look at all the different watches, there's pictures from the side profile and you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But we basically, we take the pocket watch, and I have a pocket watch here so I can kind of show you the weight profile. We take the pocket watch and we mount it into the case of the wristwatch so that it sits, right along your wrist. And so all the weight of the original pocket watch is right against your wrist. And then we use very thin, very light cases made from steel, bronze, and titanium. So we don't add a whole lot of weight to the watch. And because it has a low profile and then a big leather strap with a big metal buckle on the other side, it's balanced as you move your wrist. The other thing that we did was we angled the lugs of the watch around your wrist. So the arms, of the watch are kind of angled around your wrist so that it's balanced. And then finally, because it's a pocket watch, most pocket watches have the crown at 12 o'clock, the winder for the watch. And we put a big crown on it because there's a bunch of little parts in there that we had to manufacture. To make it set and wind. That's how you set the time and then wind the watch. They're all manually wound, so you have to wind them up once a day. But that crown or that winder is up at 12 o'clock. And so even though it's a larger watch, you don't hit it on anything, and it's not sticking out and hitting your wrist like a big watch with a big crown that's over at 3 o'clock that would kind of dig into your wrist. And so we get a lot of really positive, reviews and compliments on, I thought this was going to be big, but it actually wears really comfortably. And people love wearing these watches every day, even though they were made more so as conversation pieces, as like a special watch in the collection. I do have a lot of customers that wear these things every single day. And now I have a lot of customers that have several of them so they can mix it up, at different days of the week. But yeah, that was always an engineering challenge to just make this as wearable as possible since it is a larger watch.
Maybe really quickly here in a minute or so. I go to New Era Caps or Fanatics or wherever. Oh, another Yankee hat or another Commander's hat. Oh, I better buy it. This one is really special. Like this one back here, that's very unique, I guess.
Yeah.
But they're only $40. I couldn't do that with a watch, right? Oh, I like this watch. Oh, better get that one. You do that a couple of times, you're going to run out of money before too long.
Sure.
But how do people decide what they're going to buy? Do people just like, oh, wait, maybe there's something better tomorrow? They take a while, or do they make a decision quickly usually?
Yeah. So I don't have salespeople. The website is my salesperson. And so if, when you're on vorticwatches.com and you're just scrolling through the different watches that we have available, you're just looking at each one, you're reading about them, you're seeing the pictures, and then you're making a decision on which one you want. People, periodically email us or call us and ask us some questions. But I think the way people decide is mostly because either design wise or story wise, the watch means something to them. Like I told the story of history about Chicago. There was 3 Illinois watch brands: the Elgin Watch Company, the Illinois Watch Company, and the Rockford Watch Company. And so if you or your family has anything to do with the state of Illinois, like a customer I talked to yesterday, he grew up in Rockford, Illinois. So he's like, I have to have one of the Rockfords. And so that narrows it down quite a bit, and he can get one of those. Some of them were made by Hamilton in Pennsylvania. So if you have anything to do with Pennsylvania, like I did, I grew up in PA, I went to Penn State, maybe that Hamilton is for you, and that the story kind of resonates there. But to answer your question, I think people buy what they like. And so people buy the dial or the face of the watch. Because either it looks like a pocket watch and it stands out, or it has, truly stories in it, or like the one that we posted yesterday, it has blue numerals and that matches the blue strap of the watch perfectly. So it just looks really, really cool. And I think that's how people are making those decisions. But I don't know, people just hang out on the website and then pull the trigger when they find one.
Awesome. And sorry to hear you Nittany Lion, Iowa Hawkeyes right here. Game worn helmet. It's been a while, but it was nice to see you on the show. Thanks for the insights, and thanks for congratulations for all your success and continued good luck.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe